What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So over the last 2 decades, especially the last decade, Lou Lamoriello has been one of the most talked about, maybe the most controversial in terms of his actual management moves in the entire NHL. So today I kind of wanted to do a deep dive on his tenure with my New York Islanders and why I think that he's kind of overhated. And I'm just saying overhated. I am not saying this is going to be some massive defense for every single one of his moves. I just wanted to look at this time for the New York Islanders and add some context of what he did and maybe didn't do. This, of course, all starts in May of 2018 when the New York Islanders decided to fire longtime general manager Garth Snow in order to bring in Lamoriello, who previously worked with the Toronto Maple Leafs, and of course the New Jersey Devils. And the New York Islanders at that time were kind of a dumpster fire. They weren't one of the worst teams in the entire NHL, but they were definitely trending in that direction, having 94 points in 2017 and then 80 points despite Matt Barzal having a Calder-winning season. It looked like that they were about to enter just total irrelevancy in the NHL, and they didn't even have that good of a prospect pool. So Lamoriello, in his first action, decides to fire coach Doug Weight, who wasn't a horrible coach by any stretch, but definitely wasn't the guy, and he goes out and brings in Barry Trotz, who was fresh off a Stanley Cup win. The Washington Capitals didn't want to pay him. Lou Lamoriello gets ownership to get brought in and bring in arguably the best coach in the entire NHL. That's massive for culture. Then the 2018 draft happens, and we'll talk about that more when we go over his entire drafting record. One hit, one miss, but we'll talk about that later. But now it's time for unrestricted free agency, and John Tavares is arguably the biggest player of the entire 2010s to hit unrestricted free agency, and he ends up signing with the Toronto Maple Leafs despite the New York Islanders trying to re-sign him. He goes to Toronto on a 7-year deal at $11 million. Tavares obviously was a hometown kid with the Toronto Maple Leafs, and they were objectively in a better situation heading into the 2018-2019 season, having made the playoffs back-to-back seasons, having young stars like Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, and William Nylander. You really couldn't massively blame him for leaving. Although as an Islanders fan, I wish that he wanted out at the trade deadline, so he at least could have got something for him. He should have made a decision then, but I'm going to stay objective in this. So Lamoriello, with that $11-12 million that he was going to spend on Tavares, goes out and signs Leo Komarov on a 4-year deal at $3 million. That one didn't go so good. Brock Nelson, 1 year, 4.25, very good. Valtteri Filppula, 1 year, 2.7. Thomas Hickey, 4 years, 2.5 million. Ryan Pulock on a very good deal, 2 years, 2 million. And Robin Lehner, 1 year, 1.5. So yeah, although the Islanders maybe didn't improve that much on paper heading into next season, he tried to instill this culture by getting a guy like Barry Trotz and getting some more veteran physical players. And coming into that 2018-2019 season, they were looked at as a bottom 10 team across the board, with the Athletic projecting them for 83 points and Vegas having their over-under at 82.5. There was not a lot of hope. So I just needed to lay that out to kind of conceptualize to you guys how bad, I feel like it's not talked about, how bad of a spot the Islanders were heading into the spring of 2018 when Lamoriello took the job. Their franchise superstar wanted to go to Toronto simply because he didn't think there was a path to win in the near future with the New York Islanders. They didn't have a good prospect pool. They were expected to stink the following season. This was a bottom 5 job in the entire NHL, point blank period. They were probably expected to soon enter a rebuild instead of actually compete at a high level. But what do they do in that first season under Lamoriello and Trotz? They put up 103 points, absolutely smashed expectations, sweep the Pittsburgh Penguins, who were 2 years removed from a Stanley Cup win. They end up losing to the Carolina Hurricanes, but that was just their second playoff win in 25 years. The 2019 offseason, they attempt to go for Artemi Panarin. They almost get him, but he ends up going to the New York Rangers. I'm not going to act like Artemi Panarin would have been awesome on the New York Islanders, but instead they decide to re-sign Captain Anders Lee on a 7x7, not an amazing contract, but with that remaining money that they were going to give Panarin, they signed Varlamov, 4 years, $5 million, which was an absolute steal. Coming into that 2019-2020 season, the odds makers and overall people still think that that 2019 team was more of a fluke. They only have a 91.5 points over under, and before the COVID shutdown, they put up 96 points, make the playoffs, go on to the conference finals, and lose in 6 games to the eventual Stanley Cup champions Tampa Bay Lightning. COVID shortened season in 2021. They only have an over-under of 63.5 points. They would go on to have 71 and then make Game 7 of the conference finals against the Tampa Bay Lightning, and it's just so unfortunate I was at that game, and if they won that game, I have no doubt that they would have smacked the Montreal Canadiens, even though Carey Price was playing so good. They almost got so close to a potential Stanley Cup. So when talking about the success of the Lou Lamoriello tenure thus far, in those 6 seasons, they have made made 2 conference finals. They had another season with a playoff win. In 5 out of the 6 years, they made the playoffs since 2019. The only other teams in the NHL over that span to make 2 conference finals and make the playoffs 5 out of 6 years was the Tampa Bay Lightning, of course, the Dallas Stars, the Vegas Golden Knights, the Carolina Hurricanes, and the Edmonton Oilers. Now, granted, I'm not going to omit teams like the Florida Panthers, the St. Louis Blues, and the Colorado Avalanche that won the Stanley Cup. You obviously would have preferred their 6-year stretch over the New York Islanders. And then teams during that 6-year stretch that had comparable success but didn't quite meet that criteria that I laid out. The Boston Bruins made the playoffs every single year but only made the conference finals in 2019. And the New York Rangers made the playoffs 3 out of 6 years with 2 conference finals appearances. So objectively, during the Lou Lamoriello tenure, in terms of team success, and yes, maybe we're on the tail end of that team success, over that 6-season stretch, the Islanders have been a top 7 to 11 team in the entire NHL that's not up for debate during that stretch. So from a pure team success standpoint, you got to realize with a team like the New York Islanders, they don't have that much history outside of the 80s dynasty, so this is by far the second most successful run of the New York Islanders point-blank period. Now we're going to get into some of his trades because I do agree that there is a little bit of a mixed bag here, starting with the Devon Toews trade. They got 2 second-round picks, and Devon Toews clearly turned into a high-level, borderline top 10 defenseman in the entire NHL. Objectively a bad trade. I would provide some context that Pelech and Pulock were viewed as better players at the time, and they did have Dobson coming up in the system, but no doubt, bad trade. But one thing that I do really like about Lou Lamoriello when it comes to his trades, his deadline trades in particular, he doesn't really do rentals. You see some of these general managers absolutely blow their load at the deadline, trade all of their picks just for 25 games of someone, and unless they win the Stanley Cup, it's a failure of a trade. Lamoriello doesn't really operate like that. He traded a 2nd-round pick for Andy Green, and he was a decent piece on both of those 2 runs. A 1st, 2nd, and 3rd for Jean-Gabriel Pageau, which again does sound like a lot, don't get me wrong, but when you consider the fact that he's been a pretty good Islander last year, was a little bit underwhelming, but was a massive piece on both of their conference finals runs, and has been pretty good throughout his career as an Islander. That's a solid deal. In 2021, he got Paul Murray and Zajac for a 1st-round pick. That 1st-round pick ended up being 29th overall, and Paul Murray has been fantastic for the Islanders, especially last year, having an out-of-nowhere 30-goal season. In terms of dumping guys, it's kind of a mixed bag. He got a 2nd-round pick for Nick Leddy, whose time with the Islanders had kind of come to an end, but he did give up 2 seconds and a 3rd to dump Ladd. But again, he didn't sign Andrew Ladd to begin with. At the 2022 draft, he's traded that 13th overall pick for Alexander Romanov, and don't get me wrong, Romanov isn't some fantastic talent, but he has been a pretty effective top 4 defenseman, playing around 21, 22 minutes a night for the New York Islanders the last couple of years on playoff teams. And yes, maybe having that 13th overall that turned into Frank Nazar would have been nice, but we didn't need an 18-year-old at the time. The core clearly was more so win now. If you cared about picks, you would have had to tear it all down. In 2023 at the deadline, he obviously traded for Bo Horvat, giving up a 1st-round pick that did turn into 17th overall. Anthony Beauvillier, who was honestly a salary dump at that time, and Atu Ratu. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't like that trade at the time. I've kind of been shut up about it. They ended up locking him up on that 8-year, $8.5 million deal. Might be a problem down the line, but right now he is definitely worth that, around the 35 and 35 low-end number 1 center. And again, in terms of the 1st-round picks, it doesn't really matter for a team that is kind of all in like the New York Islanders. Atu Ratu maybe can turn into something, though, relatively soon. 2023 deadline, he trades for Pierre Engvall, only giving up a 3rd-round pick. We'll talk about that later, that contract re-signing that he gave up, as well as attaching a 2nd-round pick to dump Josh Bailey's remaining $5 million. And then before the 2024 draft, had a nice trade, trading back from 18th to 20th, still got Cole Yzerman, as well as picking up a 2nd-round pick that turned into Camille Bednarik. When it comes to signings for Lou Lamoriello, there's definitely some brutal ones. When looking at it, he likes to overpay and maybe overterm, not his high-end players. I think he gets those deals correct, and we're going to go over them, but the middle 6, bottom 4 pair guys, it can get a little bit rough. Mayfield, 7 years, $3.5 million, and Engvall, 7 years, $3 million. In the moment, I knew that those were absolute disasters to give that much term to guys in their late 20s, as well as the Komarov 4-year deal at $3 million. And Pageau was fine his first couple years, but to give him 6 years at $5 million, final couple of seasons might be rough. His deals to more core guys have been solid, though. Pulock, 8 years, 6.15. That might be the weakest of the bunch, but still, he's a good 2nd-pair guy. Pelech, 8 years, 5.75. Still very elite defensively. Barzal, 8 years, 9.15. Solid deal. Barzal's bridge, 3 years, $7 million. That was an absolute steal. And then Horvat, 8 years, 8.5, living up to that right now, as well as Sorokin. I think he's going to get back on track, 8 years, 8.25. When you look at what Shesterkin's asking for right now and what other guys might get in the near future, that's looking like a good deal. Other cheaper deals that he did pretty well on, Sorokin's bridge deal, 3 years, $4 million. That's probably his best contract, point blank period. He got 2 Vezina caliber seasons out of that. Nelson, who is currently in the last year of his 6x6, that was absolutely awesome. Jordan Eberle, 5 years, $5.5 million, pretty good. I spoke about it before, but Varlamov, 4 years, $5 million, very good deal. And Romanov, 3 years, 2.75, again, for a solid top 4 guy, very good value. And even most recently, he did sign Duclair, 4 years, $3.5 million. When you look at what other guys got, like Stevenson, 7 years, 6.25, or Jakob Trenin, 4 years, 3.5. I think we can agree that was a good deal, although he did get hurt last night against the Montreal Canadiens. When it comes to the draft, he hasn't had a lot of picks. When looking at it, I already talked about those trades. He usually trades his first round picks, but Dobson in 2018, great value. Wallstrom was kind of a miss. 2019, Holmstrom, 23rd overall. Looking like most likely a bottom sixer, but again, 23rd overall, that's okay value. 2020 didn't have any picks within the top 90. 2021 got Atu Ratu at 52nd overall, although we did trade him. Again, that was very good value there. 2022 at 65th. I still think Kallio Delius can maybe be something. 2023, Danny Nelson had 23 points in 30 games last year at Notre Dame. He could maybe be something down the line. And then in 2024, Cole Eiserman was kind of a steal. Now, where Lou Lamoriello has this team, he has 3 very good, I'd argue, elite forwards in Brock Nelson, Bo Horvat, and Matt Barzal, a 24-year-old number 1 defenseman, and hopefully a goaltender that can yet again be at Vezina level. This team is not by any means an elite contender heading into next season, or this season that we're already in, but they definitely are a potential threat in the Eastern Conference given their playoff history. Did Lou Lamoriello maybe throw away too much assets? Yes, but I do think people kind of overrate the value of first-round picks, and especially looking at what he inherited back in 2018. It's not like this team had the young pieces to potentially turn into this contender. He did the best that he could with it for the most part. Definitely made some bad trades, gave out some bad contracts, but at the end of the day, it has definitely been a successful run. Like, he maybe could have torn it down after the 2022 season, selected in that draft instead of trading for Romanov, trading some other guys, but I think that there still was enough on this team, and there still is right now, to potentially go on maybe a couple runs. They have made the playoffs in back-to-back years since he decided to kind of go more all in by trading that 13th overall pick in 2022. Will we have to do some nuclear tank from 2030 to 2036? Yes, most likely, but again, this Islanders team hasn't really tanked since 2006 to like 2011. It was overdue regardless. When he inherited this team, they weren't some young, scrappy team by any stretch. He did the best kind of with what he could. Again, by best, I don't mean that he did perfect, but he did a solid job in terms of turning this into a formidable organization that, again, has objectively been the second most successful of the entire franchise and in the upper third of the NHL since he inherited it. You can check my record on it. I wanted them to kind of retool, rebuild heading into the 2022 draft before they traded that 13th overall pick. And when they traded for Bo Horvat, we were out of the playoffs, so I was like, what are we doing? But now after that, it kind of is a point of no return, and I kind of like that we have like a definitive rebuild coming in 4 to 5 years instead of us maybe doing that weird retool, because you weren't trading Dobson, you weren't trading Barzal, doing this weird retool, and then if that failed and we just weren't making the playoffs or we're just perfectly average, then we would have just even pushed off an even further rebuild. I like that definitive nature of once Lou Lamoriello is gone, we just tear that shit down and get some elite prospect. But yeah, that's my spiel on Lou Lamoriello. I think everybody paints him kind of in a negative light, like every single move that he does is so boomerish. He has absolutely no clue what he's talking about. When looking at it objectively, the on-ice results have been there. And again, when like fan bases of teams that have not had success in recent memory kind of trash on him, it kind of makes me laugh. But yeah, let me know in the comments, what do you think about Lou Lamoriello? I understand why people criticize him, but I feel like it lacks the context of how bad of a situation that he inherited to be able to bring in a guy like Barry Trotz. I agree that the coach is probably more important than the general manager, but to bring in a guy, a Stanley Cup champion like Barry Trotz, you need a well-respected guy like Lou Lamoriello. And again, it's not like he inherited this exciting roster of young guys that had this potential to go on the run that they did for that that 3-year run or even continuously make the playoffs after. And I still think the New York Islanders, although not an actual contender, do not get me wrong, definitely will be tough outs in the playoffs the next couple of years and have the potential to go on a playoff run. Again, they check the boxes. Goaltending, have a stud, a defenseman, have apparently a legit number one. Hopefully Dobson takes another step. And they have a deep defense core and some elite forwards, maybe not a superstar. I still think that this team maybe has a couple runs, and we're going to be rebuilding in 5 to 6 years, definitively, considering the structures of the contracts. Some good, some bad. Let me know in the comments what do you think. I'll be seeing you in the next one.